Welcome back to Digicel Businesses series, Ahead of the Curve Business Talks. My name is Jaron Lewis and I'm delighted to be your host. Ahead of the Curve is a show for ambitious business professionals who want to keep up to date with what's happening in the business world, get more out of their businesses, and stay ahead of their competition. I am right here with you every month as we explore what it takes to build a successful company. That is, you guessed it, always ahead of the curve. Now this month, our topic of choice is all about data and the potential data insights can have on the growth and direction of our business. Today, we're going to speak to Phil Raby. Phil has over 14 years experience in the media and technology industry, having previously worked for businesses like Microsoft, Criteo, Quill, and TradeDoubler. And he has worked with brands the likes of British Airways, John Lewis, Marks & Spencer, and TUI, just to name a few. He is now working with Mediarithmics, the market-leading data-first marketing agency, helping clients to understand their customer data and how to use it to grow their business. Phil has agreed to speak to us today and give us some insight into the potential of our business data and how we can simply tap into this untouched resource. Phil, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here. I really want to jump right into it because I want to maximize our time here. So can you talk to me a little bit about data and the differences it can make for a business to use it correctly and not just use it?
Yeah, absolutely, Jaron. Thank you for having me on the podcast today, which is really exciting. But yeah, no, and great question, I think, as well. So, data can make a huge difference to businesses, and I think, that's from many different angles. Dependent on the business as well. That might mean including from a communications perspective. So that might be marketing or personalization, or even from a commercial point of view too. So what I mean by commercial, I mean advertising revenues, and then of course from an analytics perspective. So how can that data be used effectively within a business to make better business decisions? But I think the main challenge that we have today for many businesses anyway is we live in a world where there are so many consumer interactions of how those customers are interacting with the brand, but also how those brands are trying to communicate to those customers as well. And that in itself makes it pretty challenging for many businesses when it comes to data.
Right, and I mean, just to touch on some of the areas that you highlighted there, businesses obviously would have multiple, departments. They'd be involved in a host of activities, and that might be, e-commerce, some sort of campaign, sales engagements, that kind of thing. Throughout and across all of those touch points, they're probably going to be collecting some sort of data or some sort of customer information. What other places can they gather data?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I think data can be captured from many places, and again, it really depends. What type of business you are. I think it's useful. I think for the people watching this podcast is to provide some specific examples about how a consumer generally engages with a brand across marketing campaigns. How they engage with them on site. Ultimately that user will then convert and fold into some sort of a CRM, right? So that's generally how a consumer will engage with the brand. But how does that brand actually engage with that consumer? So that brand will engage with that consumer across, what we term in the industry today, I guess, walled gardens. So the likes of Google and Facebook. Why do we call them walled gardens? Just for the audience's understanding is, they tend to keep a lot of their assets and their data for themselves within their own ecosystem. Those brands will also be trying to engage with those consumers across the open web, email, push notification, SMS, via POS systems, via call centers as well. So data can be captured from all of those areas, right? So that's just to name a few. And of course, there's nuance between, I think, specific industries as well. So if you look at it from the retail point of view, they might be collecting data from loyalty systems, where you have the big broadcasters in the space today collecting it from CTV and OTT environments. So these new ways that they can engage with consumers, data can also be captured from there. So now ultimately, that makes it challenging in itself, because there's so many I guess areas where that data can be captured. So brands and businesses need to kind of wrap their head around that, about how do they capture their data, and where do they store that data internally. But they also need to think about what are the rights for them to be able to capture that data as well. So, and that really comes down to consent, in where that user in many countries has to provide that with regard to that data being able to process that information for specific activities as well. So, what does that consent, or what is that consent needed for? It's needed for potentially marketing communications. It's needed for advertising communications. Otherwise, all of this data that has been captured from all of those channels, which I've talked about just previously, can potentially be rendered useless by that business as well. So it's important, I think, for many businesses going out there and thinking about, well, actually, where do we capture data from? They need to ensure that they need to align with local data regulations as well for processing purposes, and ensuring the right frameworks they have in place are available, so they can actually use that data effectively for the use cases that are really important to them.
Right, and it's interesting that you'd mention rules, because it started jumping around in my head as you were giving your answer. I'm thinking there must be some sort of legislation or rules in place, a standard set of rules for companies that collect this data. Does that exist in our region currently?
So I'm pretty close to what we have in Europe. So just for the audience's understanding, I'm based in London. Digicel are one of our customers that we work with actually on a global basis. So, we have some fairly strict regulations in place in Europe around, or called the GDPR. So that framework is in place to ensure that businesses are using data correctly, and consumers' rights and privacy are protected, and their data is only processed in line with what businesses are kind of transparent, and they ask for kind of explicit consent to be able to do so. Those regulations are similar across the globe, and are certainly moving towards being similar across the globe, if they're not now, in places that we do work, like LATAM and the Americas as well, and I'm sure that the Caribbean are moving fairly close to those standards in the near future as well. So those rules need to be I guess referenced by your legal and data teams before actually being able to capture data too.
Right, and in terms of the storage of this data, obviously I'd be familiar with being a Digicel. You'd be familiar with CRM tools where you store that data, such as Salesforce and that kind of thing. But that Salesforce feels very big businessy, and it feels like big business budget as well. What about what is there for an organization that is a little bit smaller, doesn't have the size of budget that a global company like Digicel might have? What tools can they use?
Really good question, and you're absolutely right. There's lots of big enterprise platforms out there that businesses with large budgets can afford. The likes of Salesforce, etc. And they also, those big businesses as well come with suites of products as well. They don't just sell CRM; they sell, analytics or marketing services too. I think ultimately you're right, though. I think there's definitely a need, I think, for businesses that maybe don't quite have access to, the budgets of a Digicel, I guess, to store their customer information. So, there's loads of entry-level options in the market today. I mean, as a business, our businesses use HubSpot in terms of our CRM. That is an entry-level solution that can be used by smaller businesses. There's also options out there in the market like Monday or Zendesk or Pipedrive that can be leveraged by smaller businesses that don't quite have access to that budget, to be able to store that, that really valuable information that they're capturing from their consumers, whatever whatever channel that might be from as well.
Right. And of course, data is the new big thing, and you hear it a lot in the conversation around data. You hear the term data insights, right? I just want to get an understanding of what, in your opinion, what are data insights and why is it important to a business?
It's a really good question. And I think data insights in itself as a term is quite vague, right? Because it can mean totally different things to very different businesses out there in the industry today. So I think what's useful for maybe the audience is maybe trying to provide some insights about what our customers the customers that we work with in data are looking at from an insights point of view as well. So as a business today we work with leading media players and publishers, so online publishers that I guess traditionally make a lot of their revenue from advertising, right? So and what does that mean for those businesses when we talk about insights, and how is it going to make their their lives better? The types of insights they're looking at, if I'm a publisher, is certainly one of the things that we do see is this notion of pre-campaign insights. So what are the insights from a data point of view that they can give to a brand? So say for example, I'm publisher X and I have BMW who's looking to buy a campaign with me. What insights can I give them to be able to recommend to them, what are the best audiences to buy for BMW, right? And that can be done broadly today with data using first-party information that publisher might have about their audience, so known data. It might be, that publisher might not have a lot of known data, so they can then look to enriching their first-party data sets with third-party data to be able to provide those really interesting, recommendations to the likes of BMW to be able to buy campaigns as well. That's kind of point one. If we're still kind of sticking on media publishers, just for the audience to understand in a little bit more detail, what's really interesting as well for those businesses is post-campaign insights. So, how can that media publisher, and Digicel have publishers within your your ecosystem, you own Loop News, for example. What insights can I give off the back of actually how's that campaign performed against the audiences that BMW has bought against as well? Why is that useful for that said publisher? It's it drives a number of things. It drives best targeted campaigns, happier clients. It means more rebookings in the future with BMW coming back to them because they had a really good experience and really good performance with them previously as well. That's kind of like one angle that we look at, which is publishers. We also work with retailers as well, so big retailers across Europe and globally as well. What's really interesting for them is actually, when they're running a campaign which is underpinned by data, and that campaign might be across email, it might be across push notification, it might be through these channels. What information can they provide? Can they access about how those campaigns are performed? So from a benefit point of view, they can plan campaigns better moving forward to driving even better performance for their goals as well. So that kind of gives you a broad understanding of what is insights and why is it really, I guess, important for those businesses as well.
Excellent. And so obviously data is one of the most important assets that you would have as a business. And with it being so important, it surely has to be the focal point almost, especially depending on the type of business that you run. It surely has to be the focal point of your organization. So I'm curious as to how in a region where data hasn't always been the first thing that people go to. I'm curious as to how businesses can now transition and adopt a data-first culture in their businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's already important now. It's just going to become more important. So data-driven cultures and how businesses are run are, the ones that will survive, I think, will be those businesses that fundamentally adopt a culture, I guess, underpinned by data. I think for me that means that actually it has to be driven from the very top to begin with. So, from the board and the C level, and all decisions within that business need to be driven by data and filtered throughout the organization with that level of understanding that data has been used to be able to be in a position to make that specific decision about how we move forward. So that's kind of point one. What do we see in other organizations where they're making data-driven decisions today? I think number one is they're making more data accessible. So what I mean by that is not just having data available for data specialists, but also data available for teams that maybe not be technical specialists, for example, but they can leverage this data for their own specific purposes and specific use cases as well. The second thing that we see is clearly defining within that business how data can help you, to deliver the strategy that you need to deliver, and then also for what use cases and translating that into business benefits. The third one that we see is you can't adopt a data-driven culture if you have data across the organization that's in silos, right? So what we see is businesses that are reducing silos of data, but also silos across teams, and then having that cross collaboration between departments as well. So also having data specialists within those organizations that can also be approach it from a multidiscipline point of view as well. And then finally, the thing that we see is having access to the right skill sets internally that can leverage data, and making it really useful for people all the way through the organization as well. So from C-level, how do you provide those individuals at C-level with data that's going to be able to help them drive the business forward from a strategic point of view, all the way through the business, to day-to-day stakeholders that might be looking to use data to be actually, to communicate to their customers better, or to market to their customers better as well. So these are just some of the things that we see in terms of businesses adopting data and onboarding that into the way that they operate from a culture point of view.
Right, and that last point is very interesting to me because I think, especially in my own experience, when data starts getting shared across an organization and shared with non-technical people, you kind of need to bridge the gap a little bit. And I think they need to be able to visualize, more so than a technical resource, they need to be able to visualize those data insights and analytics. What would you say are a few key tools or means for bridging the gap and helping businesses to visualize those insights and analytics?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think it goes back to your point before about CRM, and you have enterprise businesses that are able to afford Salesforce, and you may have maybe smaller businesses that are able to, I guess, like our business, to be able to afford things like HubSpot. Right. So, visualization is kind of key in terms of that data. It's not useful for for an end user that isn't technical to see that in its raw format. So we see, a couple of things here. We see, bigger enterprise businesses investing in enterprise platforms like Power BI and Looker and Tableau. And they're certainly more focused on, I guess, the bigger businesses out there. And then, of course, I think for smaller businesses, there's lots of options in the industry today about, what can help you visualize that data to make better business decisions as well. So, that might be, web-based technology like Google Analytics. You have businesses like Mixpanel that can help with online user behavior. If we're looking at businesses that may have apps, you've got businesses like Flurry and Apps Flyer as well. And then Optimizely as well, which can help with, idea testing and A/B testing as well. So, I mean, I think ultimately, there's loads of options. And I think, when selecting the technology that will help you to be able to visualize that data internally, you need to be able to approach it, in terms of what type of business am I, what can I afford, but also thinking about what is the use case that you're looking to leverage with those data insights, before making that decision too.
Right, and I think we've spoken a lot about analytics, and I think that's massive for a business, that they can get back from the data that they collect. But are there any other reasons outside of the analytics piece for which businesses would use their data?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think ultimately we've talked a lot about data insights, and that's really really important for brands and businesses and whatever type of business that you are. I think, and one of the main use cases that we're seeing outside of that, that we help with, but lots of other businesses do as well. To be clear, is we help businesses leverage data to be able to use it in a way that they can, say, for example, build granular segments and audiences about their users based on past behavior with them as a brand or business, or interaction too. So what I mean by that, and I guess an example here is, for a retail brand, that might mean, a group of people. So I guess an audience would be, or a segment of people would be, it could be people that haven't purchased, have purchased more than 3 times within the last month. So I guess they would be really highly loyal users. It might even be users that haven't purchased with that brand for the last 6 months. So they're looking to, those users may potentially become dormant with those brands as well, right? So with this really powerful information that they have at their fingertips, which is aggregated from, multiple sources, CRM, loyalty systems, web, app, all of these channels as well, they're able to push this data to external platforms for communications with those people as well. So that might be through email, social, push notification, display advertising, etc. And I think it kind of comes back to the analytics piece and the reporting pieces. Once you've made that communication with those customers, then the insights and the reporting can kind of flow back into those systems internally to help that business make better decisions about how they communicate with their customers too.
So, are there KPIs that businesses should look at intently in order to drive these data initiatives? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think data. I guess a data strategy and a data-driven culture can be measured by, I guess, many KPIs. And again, it's dependent on the business, right? Because every business is different, and that can range from, financial KPIs. So examples of that could be uplift in revenue, profitability. There could be operational KPIs as well. So things like staff retention, human resources, producing products, etc. And I guess other related business practices as well. So, we see many KPIs in our space today about how businesses, measure data effectiveness. And I referenced it before. To be clear, we work with media publishers. What do they look at? They look at things like, uplifting content engagement. How many people are actually reading the articles and content that we're putting out there, or the video that we're putting out there? Uplifting advertising revenue. And those two are linked, by the way. I guess the more content that people read and watch, the more money that they make from an advertising point of view too. It could be uplifting engaged customers for those media publishers. And then from a retail point of view, what do they look at? They look at things like, things like uplifting retained customers. How do we reduce dormant customers or churn? How do we make someone that has bought one product buy 3? How do we drive new customers as well? And I think ultimately, I think from a KPI point of view, it needs to be linked to the overall goal of leveraging data, for the specific, I guess broader goal of why you would want to use data as a business as well.
Right. And of course, there is the age-old saying, and it applies here: garbage in, garbage out. The integrity of your data, I suppose, is of paramount importance, right? And I know firsthand that there are a lot of businesses that struggle with this data integrity. Do you have any tips or tricks that they can apply in order to make sure that they're getting proper data in order to build those insights and analytics from?
Yeah, I mean, kind of goes back to the point before, right? Data is coming from lots of places within an organization. It's coming from lots of customer touch points, or user touch points. And then some of the things that we see, I think, in terms of businesses that do this well, with who we work with today, so it's ultimate, and I guess number one would be, nominate a data custodian or super user within that organization, because someone has to be accountable, right, with regard to the data that's being used within that organization for specific use case. So, there certainly does need to be kind of that custodian that we, within that business, and broadly what we see in many organizations, that might be the head of data or the VP of data or the director of data, for example. That's kind of point one. Point two, ensure that your data remains clean, and then within the confines of the required use cases of actually why do you need that data within the organization. So, there's lots of data out there, but ultimately it's better to have quality data rather than, I guess, not very good data that's to a very high quantity as well. So it's important that these businesses hold, regular data, maintenance data, to ensure this is, fully aligned within the business as well. They need to, number three, I guess, ensure that the technology or where the data is stored, I guess, is linked and hasn't created silos within the organization as well. And then the final point that we see, I think, here in terms of data integrity is, I guess as a business, you need to simplify what you're doing with data. Really ask yourself, what type of data is useful for the organization? Don't capture data for the sake of capturing data. And what I mean by that might not be an individual record, but that also might be an individual record that has, multiple criteria that isn't useful as well. So start small and build on it if it's required. You don't want to get into a place where you have a ton of data, and actually a lot of that data is not really that usable for the I guess the goals or the means of you using that data within that business.
Right. And I think it would be silly of me not to ask this question, but can you share with us, success stories of any businesses that you in particular would have worked with, either regionally or globally, that have reaped the benefits of data from an activation and analytics perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work with many brands. I'll talk about, some use cases here that are, I guess, are quite maybe interesting for people. And then also, where the benefits lie as well. So, number one is we work with lots of media and publishing partners. I've already referenced that quite a few times. Without the use of data, so if they continue to sell campaigns without data, generally what they see is when they start to use data, is they tend to yield somewhere in the region of about 20 to 50% increase on the price that they're able to sell that inventory for, which is really, really powerful in itself. But that's only one use case, right? And it's a fairly simple use case. Some of the other things that we see from a case study point of view is, and it goes back to the analytics piece as well. These media publishers and these retailers, that they're working with brands to some respect, taking on their money, selling campaigns at a certain rate. But one of the things we're certainly seeing in the space today is we work with some really big retailers in France that have built a retail media proposition, which for people that don't know, it's retailers using their first-party data to sell to brands which sell product on their site, so like P&G, for example. But they're able to use the analytics that they get from those campaigns to sell reports for somewhere within the region of about 10 to 15% incremental revenue of what they see today from their advertising business, right? And that in itself can be absolutely huge. And those brands, for people that may know them on the call, the likes of Fnac and C Discount that we work with in France today as well. So those are just some examples of what we see in terms of using data. There's one final one that might be quite interesting for people, again in the media space, and it's related to what we do with Digicel today, but for businesses that don't have a clear understanding of their user base because they're not logged in, right? What we do see is advanced publishers using machine learning capabilities to leverage their known audience and then predict socio-demographic scores about the users they don't know. So, are they male? Are they female? Are they in a particular age group, for example, based on their navigation history on that site? What does that actually mean for that publisher? It means they're actually able to sell, larger campaigns and increase reach as well when it comes to the targeting that they're able to provide brands as well. So, there's lots of, there's lots of these stories about how data can be really useful for businesses, and it's all tied down to these specific use cases as well.
So, Phil, this has been excellent and insightful. I know based on, the entire interview and all the insights that you've shared, but mainly, those last points where you spoke about the benefits that a business can yield, I know is going to probably inspire some of our viewers and listeners to get out there, get into their businesses, and start putting data first in their decision making. So thank you so much. It's been insightful. I know it will change the way some of our listeners operate.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Phil, that is so much great advice, and we could spend the entire day on this topic. But unfortunately, we're nearly out of time. But before we go, I want to take a moment to say a big thank you for giving your time and knowledge so generously. Thank you, Phil. And thanks again to you, our listeners. We hope you've enjoyed this month's episode of Ahead of the Curve Business Talks. And I'll see you back here next month for our next information-packed installment. Thanks again for tuning in to today's show, and I'll see you soon as we continue Ahead of the Curve Business Talks.